In episode 5 of Avatar, Aang, Katara, and Sokka go to the Earth Kingdom city of Omashu. Though this city used to be full of kind people, just like so many other aspects of this world, that has changed, and the general populace of Omashu has grown harsh and severe. Once Aang meets the king here, however, his time in this place gets a lot stranger and seemingly a lot more dangerous, too. A lot of this episode is simply spent on humor and energetic fun. In my opinion, this episode is at its strongest when Aang, Katara, and Sokka are riding down Omashu's delivery system. It's a fairly long scene, but it maintained my interest all the way through with its fantastic animation, lively music, and its comedic changes in pacing. Beyond that, it also really makes Omashu feel like a city. In a show such as this one, where characters are moving from place to place with each episode and don't spend much time in one locale, it can be pretty difficult to find a natural way to explore a big city like this in a satisfactory manner. Oftentimes, when a show is more episodic, it can struggle with interesting world building, and its environments feel oversimplified or lifeless. Fortunately, having the characters ride through like this remedies that issue, as we cover a ton of ground very quickly, and see what the various folks in Omashu are up to. The main plot of this episode, however, is that Aang needs to overcome 3 challenges that the king of Omashu plans for him. At first glance, people who are familiar with my little review type deals might think that I would have a pretty big problem with this episode, as it seems to frequently undercut its own dramatic tension with humor. But in this episode, I don't think that's actually much of a problem, because Aang is never in real danger here, and I don't think we're even supposed to think he is. I mean, one of the things the king wants to teach Aang is that things aren't always as they seem, and we're provided with ample narrative evidence that this situation isn't really as dangerous as it seems. The king seems far too goofy to be a legitimate threat, and that's exactly the case, even though he is incredibly strong, contrary to our expectations. Basically, I don't think there's all that much narrative tension between the king and Aang in the first place, and the fact that the episode has such a consistently lighthearted tone means that its humor works quite well. If every potential threat in the show was handled this way, I'd definitely have a problem with that, but I think that having some episodes like this to serve as a change of pace is fine. Plus, this episode contains one of my favorite Sokka moments, when he thinks that the king's name might be Rocky because he's an earthbender and Katara says, "We're gonna keep trying, but that's a good backup." Speaking of the king's name, since Aang's final challenge is to come up with it, it might seem strange that I haven't talked about it at all. But I really don't think that moment is particularly important, despite it being at the end of this episode. After all, it holds the same lesson that all of the king's challenges do. Things aren't always as they seem, and it's important to keep our minds open to the possibilities. Overall, though I don't by any means love this episode, I think it does a good job of changing up the pace of the story a little bit, and the high level of technical quality involved here, especially in the animation departments, makes parts of it a joy to watch. The next episode, Imprisoned, follows an earthbender named Haru, whose father was taken away for earthbending. Here we see the fear that the Fire Nation has inflicted upon others and what their control can mean. In this case, people's actions are controlled by the Fire Nation, to the point where they can't even bend anymore without the threat of being carted off to a prison. I really like the ideas this episode puts forth, and how we see what Fire Nation control really does. These people have their resources stolen from them, their autonomy ripped away, and a system is created where not only is another force watching them, but the people are monitoring themselves out of a fear that something bad could happen. For example, Haru's mother tells him that he can't use earthbending, not because she doesn't want him to be happy doing that, but because she's afraid that he will be hurt and taken away from her. She does it, at least in part, out of love for him. Meanwhile, this old man Haru saves using earthbending ends up turning him into the Fire Nation, despite the fact that he saved his life, which shows just how deep the Fire Nation's control over others is. Of the main cast, the character who has the most focus here is Katara. Here, Katara's ideals and hopefulness are put to the test, as she needs to put everything on the line to try and get these earthbenders to fight back. Of course, this is an exploration of aspects of her character we've already seen, but we haven't seen them to quite this degree before, and it's important to show just how far she's willing to take this. I mean, she even gets herself carted off to prison because she hopes she can get the earthbenders in prison to fight back, and because she wants to save Haru. And she refuses to give up on these people, even after they so adamantly state that they have no plan to escape and that they're simply trying to survive here. I also like how this episode uses humor. First off, there are some scenes that I just really enjoy, like when Sokka and Katara fake argue and it all sounds so forced and, well, fake. The amount of movement and slick animation here, the fact that it's so clear so much time went into getting the movement just right, makes me chuckle every time I see it. Second, and this is where most of the episode's humor comes from, there are all these moments where the Fire Nation troops are shown to be incompetent. Now at first, I thought that this could be a bad thing, that it could undermine the Fire Nation as a serious threat and subtract from the tension here. However, I think the use of humor here goes beyond just throwing in jokes to keep people entertained. In my mind, the purpose here is to show that this group of Fire Nation troops is genuinely, through and through, incompetent. If this is the case, that means that they aren't as huge of a threat as they seem, and even more so than if this humor wasn't present, it is fear that keeps these people under control. Basically, on the surface, the Fire Nation seems threatening, they seem all-powerful, and they seem to have things under control. But in moments when a soldier thinks that a lemur is lifting a rock, or when a warden throws a captain off his ship without even realizing that that's the captain who just went overboard, well, here we see that there are cracks in this group of Fire Nation troops that can be exploited. That if these people can overcome their fear, there's a good chance that they can win against these people. So the self-monitoring is what's really keeping these Earthbenders in check, not the members of the Fire Nation currently watching them. I also really like how the Earthbenders use the coal the Fire Nation has been stealing to beat them. After all, the Fire Nation has been taking coal from Haru's home, and now here it is for the Earthbenders to use. In the end, the pieces of the Earthbenders' homes that they've tried to take gives them the ability to win. Overall, this is another very strong episode, and one that manages to strike a good balance between humor, character development, and tension. Next up is episode 7, which is the first part in a two-part thing. In this episode, a bunch of villagers need Aang's help, as an angry spirit has been terrorizing them. However, although the situation is already dangerous, it's about to get a lot worse, as when the winter solstice rolls around, the natural world and the spirit world become closer, and the lines between them blur. This means that the spirit could cause even more havoc soon if it isn't taken care of. Here, a lot of emphasis is placed on how Aang feels that he has failed as the Avatar, and that he continues to fail. So he wants someone to help him be an Avatar, but he doesn't know where to find the help he needs. Of course, one of Aang's roles is to serve as a bridge between the physical world and the spirit world, and in this episode he needs to realize his potential. Although he doesn't know what to do, these people need his help, and he wants to help them. A lot of the elements of the story that have already been evident are just made more evident here, such as the potential Aang's journey and title has to make him lonely, or the possibility that people will just let him do everything on his own because he's their only hope. Meanwhile, Katara's place in the show as a hopeful figure and Sokka's unwillingness to just let Aang take burdens on his own is exemplified, with how Katara tries to encourage Aang and with how Sokka runs in to help Aang when he's fighting the spirit. Similarly, the thematic importance of balance is explored through the duality of the physical and spiritual world. In the end, just as Katara gives Aang an acorn to comfort him, assuring him that the forest can grow back, Aang gives the same thing to this angry spirit. In this way, he calms the spirit, and we see how, to a certain degree, Aang already has a teacher in Katara. Her hopefulness and optimism is not only something that brings people together, but it's also something that brings the spiritual and physical worlds together too. This episode also reveals more about Zuko's character, through the fact that when Uncle Iroh is taken by Earth Kingdom soldiers, Zuko chooses to go after him and save him, even when he sees a way to follow the Avatar. This is another case where more emphasis is placed on stuff that we already knew, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, we knew that Zuko respected his uncle, but maybe we didn't know that he cared for him this much. It's good to go through these things in more powerful ways, to make it clear what the most important parts of these characters are. I know I haven't said much about it really, but I do enjoy this episode quite a lot, even if there isn't all that many unique or new ideas to dig into here. As I said though, that's not really the point of this episode. This is just emphasis through repetition and escalation, and it also sets up the plot of the next episode. Episode 8 continues right where the previous episode left off, and Aang is trying to leave to go to the Fire Nation without Katara and Sokka because he's worried that they could get hurt. He needs to get to the Fire Nation because that's where he can find Avatar Roku's spirit, and where he can get some guidance. However, he needs to get there very soon, as there's only a small window of opportunity for him to see Avatar Roku. After that, he will need to wait another year before he can speak with Roku. As he makes his way into the Fire Nation, Zuko follows close behind, and the Fire Nation is a dangerous place for Zuko as well. A decent chunk of this episode is spent on an exciting action scene, where Aang needs to get past this blockade of Fire Nation ships. One thing that stands out to me about Avatar's action is how varied it is. We've had one-on-one duels, towns being burned, giant beasts attacking villages, a flying sky bison getting attacked in the sky, and all sorts of other interesting scenarios. And we're only 8 episodes into the show. Additionally, the action scenes rarely, if ever, overstay their welcome, and move at a brisk pace, and despite all the impressive and intensive animation, I don't recall seeing any awkward moments where animation becomes less fluid or where the frame rate dips. It's incredibly rare for a series to be this ambitious and this consistent, and every time I watch these episodes, I'm reminded of just how exciting the technical mastery on display here is. One important thematic aspect of this episode is found in the 5 Fire Sages. 4 of them want to stop Aang from contacting Roku, but one of them helps Aang and recognizes how important it is for Aang to contact Roku. This one sage stands in for all the people in the Fire Nation who dislike how things are being run. After all, it's not as though the Fire Nation is one hive mind with all the same ideals. There are still individuals here, some of which want the world to find balance again. This is the beginning of a pattern of good firebenders who want to help Aang entering the story, displaying that the Fire Nation is just as important for balance as any other nation, and that its people are capable of helping Aang make his way through his journey. Beyond the fact that some of the Fire Nation can and will help Aang, there's also the idea that the Fire Nation is fractured. Here, 3 different types of Fire Nation people clash: Zuko, Zhao, as well as Roku and the good Fire Sage. Again, the Fire Nation might be powerful, but the show isn't painting them as one people, with a single evil identity. There are good people and shades of gray here. The Fire Nation's politics and ideals are more complex than one might initially expect. I also like how a time limit is put on Aang's quest, with how the comet is coming and Fire Lord Sozin can harness its power. If it arrives before Aang can defeat him, that could very well be the end of Aang's fight. It feels like this is a good time to bring a greater sense of urgency into the plot and to elevate the stakes. After all, this quest has already been a big enough burden for Aang to bear, but now, when there's this added time limit, well, it's even worse, and in the coming episodes, it will be part of what leads to him making some mistakes, in a way that his character development is fast-tracked in a natural way. This is yet another strong episode, and one that, in particular, has managed to advance the main arc of this season and of the overall story, while still containing an arc within this episode itself that's engaging. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. As always, I want to thank all my patrons over on patreon.com who helped me make this all possible. I am incredibly appreciative of them, and I just can't thank them enough. Thank you to all of you as well who are still sticking with this series. I am similarly thankful to you. Let me know what you thought about this part of this video series and about the episodes themselves in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope that you have an awesome day. Bye-bye.